My parents sent me to prison for a crime I never committed, and the day I was released changed everything. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Rhea Knox. For most of my life, I believed my parents were strict because they cared. Lauren and Mavis Knox were respected in our town. People trusted them. I trusted them too. That trust is what destroyed me. One morning, police came to our house with a warrant. They said money was missing from the family business. Documents had my name on them. I was confused and scared. I thought my parents would protect me. Instead, they stood silent. Later, in court, they spoke against me. They said I had access. They said I was troubled. I watched my own parents lie while looking straight at me. The judge believed them. I was sentenced to prison. I was 23 years old. My parents never visited. They never called. They told everyone I brought shame to the family. Inside prison, I lost years of my life, but I learned something important. I learned how quiet betrayal can be. Every night, I replayed the trial in my mind. Small details began to stand out. Things that never made sense. I realized someone had planned everything carefully. Someone who knew me well. The day I was released, my parents didn't come. No ride. No apology. As I walked out with a small bag and nowhere to go, I made myself a promise. I would find the truth. I wouldn't scream or beg. I would wait, watch, and prove who really destroyed my life. That day didn't give me freedom. It gave me purpose. I spent my childhood in a small Midwest town where nothing ever seemed out of place. Neighbors waved, lawns were trimmed, and everyone believed they knew each other. Inside that calm setting, I lived with Lauren and Mavis Knox, the two people everyone admired. To the outside world, they were caring, generous, and deeply involved in the community. People often told me how lucky I was to have such devoted parents. At home, things felt very different. Every choice I made was watched closely. What I wore, who I spoke to, where I went, and how long I stayed out were all decided for me. My opinions were brushed aside. My dreams were called unrealistic. If I questioned anything, I was reminded that obedience was respect. Silence became my safest habit. Lauren believed control meant protection. He tracked every step of my routine and demanded explanations for small changes. Mavis followed his lead, smiling in public while enforcing rules in private. Praise only came when I did exactly what they wanted. Mistakes were treated as moral failures, not lessons. At school events and town gatherings, they held my hand and spoke proudly about family values. Behind closed doors, affection came with conditions. Love was something to earn, not something freely given. I learned early how to hide discomfort behind polite smiles. Friends weren't welcome unless approved. Privacy didn't exist. Even my thoughts felt unsafe to share. I grew up feeling trapped in a house that looked warm but felt cold. From the outside, our home appeared peaceful. From the inside, it was tight and quiet, ruled by fear of disappointing the people who claimed they knew what was best for me. I didn't realize then how dangerous that kind of control could become. I only knew that I was slowly disappearing, even while living under the same roof as the people everyone trusted most. Trouble arrived quietly, without warning, and it wore a familiar face. One afternoon, officials appeared asking questions about missing money connected to the company my family owned. I stood nearby, confused, listening as numbers, dates, and transactions were spoken like a foreign language. I had never handled accounts, signed contracts, or touched company records. None of it belonged to my responsibilities. Soon, papers were laid out on a table. Forms carried handwriting that looked similar to mine but felt wrong. Signatures copied, initials placed with care, dates filled in perfectly. I stared at those pages, certain I had never seen them before. Still, everyone else seemed convinced. The accusation settled on me like a shadow. Investigators said funds had vanished over time. They claimed the trail led straight to my name. I asked how that was possible. I didn't have passwords. I wasn't listed on financial permissions. I had no reason to steal from something I didn't control. My questions were met with silence or shrugs. The story grew heavier each day. Whispers spread through town. People who once smiled avoided my eyes. I could feel judgment forming before facts were even checked. Somehow, every missing dollar pointed in my direction, as if someone had carefully arranged the path. I searched my memory, trying to understand what I had missed. There was no moment of temptation, no secret plan, no benefit for me. Nothing added up. Logic didn't matter anymore. Appearances did. Meetings followed. Statements were taken. Each conversation ended the same way, with officials nodding slowly, already convinced they knew the truth. I felt smaller with every step of the process. What hurt most was realizing how easily the narrative stuck. Evidence didn't need to be real, only believable. And the version they chose painted me as the perfect answer to a problem I didn't create. The crime wasn't mine, yet my name carried its weight long before I understood how deeply it would change everything. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. I waited for my parents to speak, believing this would be the moment everything turned around. They knew the truth. They had to. When Lorne and Mavis were called forward, I finally lifted my head, ready to hear them stand up for me. They didn't. Lorne spoke first, steady and confident. His voice carried authority, the same tone he used during town meetings. He explained how I had been distant, secretive, difficult. He said I understood the business more than people realized. Each sentence placed another stone on my chest. None of it matched reality, yet he delivered it like fact. Mavis followed, her expression soft, almost sad. She told the court she worried about my behavior, my attitude, my need for independence. She said she tried to guide me but failed. Her words were gentle, carefully chosen, wrapped in concern. That made them worse. She didn't sound angry or forced. She sounded sincere. I searched their faces for hesitation. I found none. No shaking hands. No broken sentences. They answered questions with ease, as if rehearsed. When asked if they believed I was responsible, both agreed without pause. Their certainty echoed through the room. I wanted to shout. I wanted to interrupt. My body refused to move. Shock held me still. The betrayal cut deeper than any accusation could. Strangers doubting me hurt, but this felt unreal. These were the people who taught me right from wrong. The people I once trusted completely. As they returned to their seats, neither looked my way. No glance. No apology. Just calm acceptance of the damage they caused. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, but permanently. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting a case. I was standing alone against the very people who shaped my life. Their testimony didn't just support the charges. It sealed my fate. The lies didn't sound forced or desperate. They sounded polished, practiced, and deadly. That day, I learned how convincing betrayal can be when it comes from those closest to you. The ruling arrived quickly, spoken in a firm voice that left no space for hope. Time was assigned like a number, not a future. My knees weakened as officers guided me away, while murmurs filled the room. I kept waiting for someone to object, to interrupt, to say a mistake had been made. Nothing happened. Transportation followed soon after. Metal doors closed. Chains rattled. The world I knew vanished behind concrete walls. Days blended into one another, measured by bells and strict routines. Nights felt endless. I held on to one thought only: surely my family would reach out once shock passed. They never did. I wrote letters carefully, choosing words filled with respect and restraint. Each envelope carried quiet desperation. Weeks passed. Then months. No reply arrived. Not a single visit request appeared on the list. Staff stopped asking whether I expected anyone. The answer became obvious. Later, I learned more through distant sources. Legal papers confirmed I was removed from inheritance claims. Personal belongings were sold or discarded. My name was erased from records tied to the household. When people asked about me, Lauren and Mavis offered a simple explanation. They said I made my own decisions. They said consequences followed choice. They framed my absence as rebellion, not injustice. Inside, I adjusted to survival. I learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. Trust became rare. Sleep came lightly. Every reminder of family felt like salt on an open wound. I replayed memories, searching for warmth, questioning whether any affection had ever been genuine. What hurt most wasn't the isolation or the sentence itself. It was knowing I had been replaced by a story more convenient than truth. I was no longer their child. I was a cautionary tale they used to protect themselves. Abandonment settled slowly, like dust, covering everything. Eventually, tears stopped coming. Something took their place. I understood then that waiting for support was pointless. Whatever connection once existed had been severed completely. I wasn't just confined by walls. I had been cut loose from blood, history, and identity. That separation marked the true beginning of my punishment. Confinement reshaped me in ways I never expected. Fear faded first, replaced by alertness. Every movement mattered. Every sound carried meaning. I stopped reacting and started noticing. Survival demanded control, not emotion. Anger wasted energy. Silence preserved it. Structure ruled each day. Fixed hours, counted steps, measured meals. I followed schedules with precision, not because I was forced, but because order gave me strength. Waiting became a skill. Stillness became power. I learned that endurance was quieter than resistance. That was when June Halberd noticed me. She was older, sharp-eyed, and rarely spoke without reason. Others avoided her, unsure whether she was kind or dangerous. One evening, she sat beside me and asked a simple question about my routine. I answered carefully. She nodded, then returned the next day. Soon, our conversations became regular. June taught without sounding like a teacher. She showed me how to record details mentally, how to separate facts from emotion. She explained the value of patterns, how small inconsistencies often hide larger truths. Nothing happens by accident, she said once. Someone always benefits. She encouraged me to write privately, not feelings, but observations. Dates. Sequences. Names. She warned me never to rush conclusions. Time, she said, reveals what force cannot. Watching mattered more than acting. Under her guidance, I stopped shrinking inward. I began to sharpen. My thoughts grew clearer. My reactions slowed. I stopped asking why and started asking how. How events lined up. How stories were shaped. How blame traveled conveniently. June never asked about my case directly. She didn't need to. She knew injustice when she saw it. Before she was transferred, she left me with one final piece of advice. Truth survives longest when you let it breathe, she told me. Don't chase it. Prepare for it. After that, everything shifted. I no longer measured days by loss, but by readiness. The wall stayed the same, but I didn't. I was no longer just enduring time. I was preparing for the moment it would matter. One quiet afternoon, while reviewing old paperwork stored in my memory, something surfaced that had always felt wrong. It wasn't a feeling driven by pain or anger, but by logic. A detail sat out of place, unnoticed before because I hadn't known how to look. During the hearings, certain forms were referenced repeatedly. Authorization slips. Approval sheets. Each carried markings linked to me. At the time, I focused on the accusations, not the fine points. Now, with distance and training of thought, those fine points demanded attention. The markings followed a pattern. The curve of a letter. The pressure at the end of a line. The way certain strokes leaned instead of standing straight. I had written my name countless times in my life. School forms. Job papers. Personal notes. My style was consistent, shaped by habit and muscle memory. These markings weren't. They were too rigid. Too deliberate. Every stroke looked practiced, not natural. There was no hesitation, no variation. That alone raised concern. Genuine writing carries small flaws. These did not. Then memory connected the final piece. I had seen that style before. Not on my own pages, but across the dinner table. Lauren filled out documents constantly. He took pride in precision. His letters always leaned the same way. His endings pressed harder, as if to seal authority into ink. The resemblance was undeniable once I allowed myself to see it. The realization didn't arrive with shock. It came quietly, like a door unlocking. Suddenly, timelines aligned. Access made sense. Opportunity became clear. The path no longer felt random. I didn't react outwardly. No gasp. No tears. I stored the observation exactly as June taught me. Carefully. Completely. Without emotion. This wasn't proof yet. It was direction. For the first time, clarity replaced confusion. The blame trail hadn't been careless. It had been crafted. And the hand behind it belonged to someone who knew my habits well enough to imitate them, but not well enough to replicate them perfectly. That small difference mattered more than any speech or testimony. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was real. In that moment, I understood something important. The truth had always been present. I just hadn't been ready to recognize its shape. Morning light hit my face as gates opened, signaling an end that felt unreal. I stepped forward carrying only worn clothing and documents stamped with dates that stole entire seasons from my life. No one waited beyond the fence. No ride. No familiar voice. Just space and noise moving on without me. Travel back felt longer than expected. Roads led toward memories I no longer belonged to. Buildings stood unchanged, painted with comfort I could never share. The town welcomed routine, not return. I walked past shops where faces paused briefly, then turned away. Recognition mixed with discomfort followed me like a shadow. Everything pointed back to the same center. The company logo appeared everywhere. Signs looked new. Windows shined. Vehicles lined the lot. Business had not suffered. It had expanded. Prosperity bloomed from roots tangled in my absence. People spoke kindly about Lauren and Mavis. Their names carried praise. Donations. Leadership. Success. Stories framed them as survivors of disgrace caused by someone else. That someone was me. I listened quietly as strangers repeated a version of events that painted me as reckless and ungrateful. Housing was temporary. Employment uncertain. I owned nothing beyond determination and restraint. Each step reminded me how easily a life could be stripped down to survival. Yet anger never surfaced. Observation did. Calculation followed. Passing the old house felt strange. Curtains hung neatly. Garden trimmed. Nothing showed loss. Nothing showed consequence. The image hurt less than expected. It confirmed something important. I was never missed. I was replaced. Night settled in, and exhaustion arrived with it. Still, sleep refused to come. Thoughts moved steadily, not wildly. I studied details instead of memories. Success requires foundations. Foundations leave traces. Every thriving structure depends on records, approvals, timing. Freedom didn't feel like relief. It felt like exposure. I was visible again, but powerless in appearance only. Years inside had removed fear. All that remained was patience sharpened by distance. I stood alone, surrounded by proof that lies can flourish when protected. That reality no longer crushed me. It clarified my next steps. I had returned empty-handed, but not unprepared. They believed the story had ended. For me, it had finally begun. I kept my distance and blended into ordinary routines. Confrontation would have solved nothing. Noise attracts attention, and attention invites resistance. I chose invisibility instead. Temporary work filled my days. Cleaning offices. Filing paperwork. Running errands. Positions that required trust but never invited questions. I became someone people overlooked. That worked in my favor. During breaks and quiet hours, I listened. Conversations revealed more than arguments ever could. Names surfaced. Vendors. Old partners. Storage locations. Paper doesn't disappear easily. It just gets misplaced, boxed, or forgotten. Especially when people believe no one is searching. I followed trails patiently. County offices held copies of permits and amendments. Clerks recognized faces connected to long-standing enterprises and spoke freely when asked simple questions. I requested public documents without urgency, letting time stretch between visits. Familiarity builds comfort. Comfort lowers guards. Evenings were reserved for review. I compared timelines, approvals, and shifts in ownership language. Certain changes happened close together. Too close. Adjustments that looked routine carried subtle inconsistencies. Dates didn't align cleanly. Initials appeared where full names usually belonged. Some filings referenced previous versions that no longer appeared in active folders. Storage units provided more answers. Old boxes labeled as outdated contained carbon copies, handwritten notes, and drafts never meant to resurface. Dust protected them better than locks. Each discovery added structure to a larger picture forming slowly but clearly. I avoided emotion entirely. Facts stood on their own. Numbers don't argue. Ink doesn't defend itself. Truth doesn't require permission to exist. It only needs to be seen. Weeks turned into months. My collection grew thicker, heavier, more complete. Patterns repeated across years, not accidents but habits. Someone had relied on familiarity to avoid scrutiny. That reliance created predictability. Predictability creates exposure. I never stepped near my parents' path. No accidental meetings. No shared spaces. Silence remained my shield. They believed distance meant defeat. They mistook quiet for weakness. By the time I finished, I didn't feel angry or vindictive. I felt precise. Everything I gathered spoke calmly, clearly, and in order. Nothing rushed. Nothing exaggerated. I wasn't building revenge. I was assembling reality. And reality, once organized, becomes impossible to ignore. Piece by piece, the truth emerged like a puzzle long ignored. Every file, every ledger, every faintly stamped note began to point in a single direction. The story I had lived was carefully crafted, but not by accident. It had a designer, and that designer had sat at the head of my childhood dining table. The missing funds weren't lost to chance. Transfers, adjustments, and vague entries led back to accounts only my parents controlled. The forged signatures I had noticed earlier were deliberate. They weren't sloppy, they were calculated. Someone had used my name as a shield, knowing no one would look beyond the familiar. Contracts I had never signed carried their fingerprints. Approvals, amendments, and internal memos aligned perfectly with the periods when I had been absent or distracted. The pattern wasn't random. Every inconsistency now made sense. They had manipulated perceptions, positioned witnesses, and timed events to make me appear guilty. It wasn't just about money. It was about image. Reputation mattered more than honesty. Lauren and Mavis had cultivated a life in the town that depended on trust, admiration, and influence. My innocence was inconvenient. My existence in the way of their plan. Framing me ensured the community continued to believe in them while hiding their misconduct. I revisited every conversation, every dinner, every lesson in control. The subtle comments, the gentle corrections, the warnings about responsibility, all became tools of preparation, not love. They had trained me to follow, and then exploited that trust when it suited them. The betrayal was complete. Every step of my suffering had been orchestrated. It wasn't a moment of weakness or panic, it was premeditated. They had seen me as a means to an end, a scapegoat to protect their legacy. Understanding the depth of their deception didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. The person who hurt me most wasn't a stranger. It was the only family I had ever known. I approached the next steps carefully, knowing that haste could ruin everything I had built. Months of quiet observation and methodical collection of records had created a map of truth. I didn't act impulsively. I acted with intent. Every file, ledger, and note had been checked twice, cross-referenced, and verified. Accuracy became my ally. Finding the proper channels required patience. I avoided sensationalism and confrontation. Authorities respond to facts, not emotion. I organized everything into clear, chronological order, highlighting inconsistencies, forged entries, and financial manipulations. Each piece connected logically to the next, leaving no room for doubt. Submitting the evidence was not thrilling. It was deliberate. I explained each document, each irregularity, calmly and precisely. I provided copies, annotated timelines, and a detailed explanation of how the embezzlement had been hidden behind my name. My tone carried no accusation, only clarity. I resisted the urge to gloat or vent. Revenge, in its raw form, rarely works. Precision works. The law responds to structure, not spectacle. As the authorities reviewed the files, I remained patient. I watched the process unfold quietly, knowing the truth had power beyond emotion. Days later, I began to see results. Investigators followed the trails exactly as I had mapped them. Questions were asked, records revisited, and accounts frozen for further examination. The name I had carried through years of false shame was finally untangled from the lies. For the first time since my release, I felt control return. This wasn't about punishment or vengeance. It was about restoring what had been taken, my identity, my reputation, my life. Pain had taught me vigilance. Betrayal had taught me strategy. I had turned suffering into action. Every step had been deliberate, every move precise. In that precision, I found power I had never known in anger or despair. The town that once celebrated Lorne and Mavis shifted overnight. Conversations hushed when their names came up. Invitations vanished. People who had once smiled at them in shops or waved across lawns now avoided eye contact. The admiration that had insulated them crumbled under scrutiny. Legal proceedings moved swiftly once investigators had the complete picture. Courtrooms filled with evidence I had carefully compiled, showing patterns, transfers, and forgeries tied directly to their actions. Witnesses confirmed the timeline. Experts verified the documents. No gaps remained. When the charges were announced publicly, shock rippled through the community. Those who had trusted them, supported them, or relied on their guidance struggled to reconcile what they saw with what they believed. Headlines carried words like betrayal and fraud, terms that felt distant until now. Neighbors who once praised their philanthropy now whispered about deception. Board members and business partners reviewed every transaction. Foundations and donations were scrutinized. Reputation, built over decades, collapsed faster than any single person could have imagined. I observed quietly, knowing exposure was more powerful than confrontation. Public accountability carried weight beyond anger or argument. Each document, each testimony, confirmed a pattern of calculated betrayal. The people who had engineered my downfall could no longer hide behind charm or courtesy. In court, Lorne and Mavis could not maintain composure. Their carefully curated image failed under scrutiny. Cross-examinations highlighted inconsistencies and forced admissions. Statements that once seemed innocuous became damning. The same community that had celebrated them now watched with disbelief as every lie was revealed. The fall was not instant, but it was inevitable. I didn't revel in it. I had no desire for humiliation. Still, the truth demanded recognition. Justice wasn't about revenge, it was about correction. By the end, their influence had eroded completely. Trust dissolved. Power slipped away. They were forced to face the consequences they had spent years hiding from. And in that moment, the world finally saw the reality I had lived for so long. The final chapter of my life in that town began quietly. The legal system restored my name, removing the stain that had clung to me for years. Records updated. Statements corrected. Official documents reflected reality instead of lies. The weight I had carried for so long lifted, not with celebration, but with calm acknowledgement. I walked through streets I once knew with a new awareness. Faces looked familiar, yet I moved past them without expectation. I didn't seek apologies or explanations. I didn't need acknowledgement from those who had betrayed me. Their consequences were visible enough: loss of trust, reputation, and authority served as their reckoning. I reclaimed small things first. My time. My choices. The ability to plan each day without surveillance or manipulation. Every decision belonged to me alone, unmonitored and unjudged. That freedom, subtle but profound, felt more powerful than any confrontation could have offered. Invitations to speak, to reconcile, or to explain themselves never mattered. I declined quietly, recognizing that closure doesn't require dialogue. It requires acceptance of reality and a commitment to one's own path. Forgiveness was unnecessary. What mattered was moving forward without carrying the weight of anger or resentment. I found work that allowed focus and independence. I restored routines that had been stolen. I nurtured self-respect rather than grudges. Each morning, the choice to step forward with dignity became a reaffirmation that my life was mine, not theirs. In private, I reflected on everything endured: the betrayal, the isolation, the false accusations. Each memory remained, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it reminded me how careful observation, patience, and deliberate action can reclaim power even from the most calculated deception. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need approval. I needed peace. And finally, after years of being defined by lies, I had it. I walked forward carrying my story, unbroken, unshaken, and entirely mine. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away, or should I have tried to forgive them? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.